Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I am actually going to give praise to Kotaku today. What? I know, right? Like, that's like 2 weeks in a row. I've gone, good job, Kotaku. See, it does happen. But I'm going to back off because my light's going crazy, I think, because I'm wearing clothes that are too dark for my auto iris. But Kotaku did a really good, legit journalism investigative piece on Anthem. And I wanted to share it because it touches on some of the stuff I said in my, remember that video I made after the VIP weekend that wasn't at all VIP? And I made some comments on it, and a lot of it is come out in here that, you know, I said there were problems with like I heard there were issues with Frostbite, and, you know, there were signs that they just weren't listening to the fans. They were tone deaf. And a lot of the stuff in this article basically says as much, but it goes beyond that. Apparently, according to this, it wasn't even supposed to be called Anthem. They'd already made shirts that were called Beyond, and I admit that is sort of not a good name. Beyond what? But they decided that it would be too difficult to trademark Beyond. I don't know why Anthem's better, but apparently, you know, Beyond was out and Anthem was in. But apparently right now it's sitting on a 55 on Metacritic. Ouch. That's BioWare's lowest score ever, even lower than Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, I think that Andromeda was somewhat buoyed by critics going, it's not that bad, you guys. But the article, this paragraph, I just want to wet your whistle because it's a really long article here, but, you know, it's sort of, fans have speculated endlessly as to how Anthem went so awry. Was it originally a single-player role-playing game like BioWare's previous titles? Did EA force BioWare to make a Destiny clone? Did they strip out all of the good missions to sell later as downloadable content? Is the loot system secretly driven by an elaborate AI system that keeps track of everything you do so it can get you to spend more money on the game? I didn't say that part. The answer to those questions is no. Okay, but there's a lot more to it. Where's the free? They talked about stress leave. They talked about the crunch. Once again, crunching doesn't make a good game. They actually have a term called a stress casualty. Quote, I actually cannot count the amount of stress casualties we had on Mass Effect Andromeda or Anthem, said a BioWare developer. That means someone who had such a mental breakdown from stress that they're just gone for 1 to 3 months. Some come back, some don't. Great. But what this article talks about is this phenomenon called Bioware Magic, which is a belief that no matter how rough a game's production might be, things will always come together in the final months. The game will coalesce. It happened on the Mass Effect trilogy, on Dragon Age Origins, and on Inquisition. Veteran BioWare developers like to refer to production as a hockey stick. It's flat for a while, and then it suddenly jolts upward. Even when a project feels like a complete disaster, there's a belief that with enough hard work and enough difficult crunch, it'll all come together. Here's why that's not going to work on a game like Anthem. And here's why it didn't work on a game like Anthem. They should not have for a second believed that this was going to work on Anthem. Because with any other BioWare game, they knew they were making an RPG with a beginning, middle, and end. I mean, God, going back to the Baldur's Gate games, it was basically a D&D campaign. The DNA of what kind of game it was hardwired in. You could only screw up so bad because, of course, it came together because you knew where you were going. Mass Effect and Dragon Age were just, well, we want to make a D&D game without the D&D license, and we want to make a Star Wars game and do it without the Star Wars license so we can own the license and throw it in a blender with like Dune and Babylon 5 and a Farscape and a bunch of other cool sci-fi and make our own thing. But they knew where they were going with it. It was like a sci-fi space shooter with exploration and you know, gunplay with like a VAT-style dialogue wheel. They didn't have that in Andromeda. So not Andromeda. Oh God, Freudian slip. Anthem. They had an idea. That idea was that it was going to be the greatest game they had ever made, unlike anything they had ever made before. Don't believe me? It's in the freaking article. At the beginning, they called it Dylan. In late 2012 and 2013, while finishing up the Mass Effect trilogy, Bioware director Casey Hudson and a small team of longtime Mass Effect developers started work on a project that they hoped would be the Bob Dylan of video games, meaning something that would be referenced by video game fans for years to come. Even within Bioware, it was a mystery project. You needed a password to get into the wiki, according to one person who was on it. For a while, the team stayed small. Most of the Bioware staff were on Dragon Age Inquisition, which needed all hands on deck in order to ship by the end of 2014. The early ideas for Dylan, which we'll call Anthem from now on for clarity, I want to call it Dylan because this is the core of where things went wrong, right at the beginning. The early ideas for Dylan were ambitious and changing constantly, according to people on the project, as is typical during the sort of ideation phase. No one knew what the game would look like yet. They just wanted to see what might be cool. It would be an action game, certainly, and you'd be able to play it with your friends. The goal was to get away from traditional sci-fi and fantasy, so the game would feel distinct from Mass Effect and Dragon Age. One concept that quickly emerged was the idea of a dangerous hazard-filled planet. Anthem would be set on a hostile alien world. In order to go out in the wilderness, you'd need a robot suit, a realistic NASA-inspired robot suit. The pitch was simple: Iron Man, but less cartoony. Okay, that's fine for an art direction. That's fine if you're making a movie. What is it regarding a game? It's a space shooter, the same way Mass Effect was a space shooter. It's not that different. The thing is, the reason the early Bioware games were great, they were like, we want to computerize a D&D experience. You can explain that. You know where you're going. Mass Effect, well, we basically want to make a KOTOR style game, like an Old Republic, the Knights of the Old Republic style game without the Star Wars license. Great, they did that. Dragon Age. We want to make a D&D game that isn't called D&D, and we want to make our own world and not have to worry about the Wizards of the Coast license. They did that. They had a core of something. Anthem didn't have that. And if you want to see how far they strayed, check this out. Over the months, a core concept started to crystallize. Anthem's planet would be sort of like the Bermuda Triangle of this universe, with an inexorable gravity that was constantly pulling in alien ships and hazards. As a result, the world would be lethal and full of dangerous creatures. You are at the bottom of the food chain, and everything is significantly more powerful than you, than one person who worked in the game. When describing these early iterations of Anthem, developers have made comparisons to Dark Souls' Darkest Dungeon, even Shadow of the Colossus. Okay, Shadow of the Colossus wasn't full of dangerous creatures. It was a whole lot of nothing. There would be big, scary creatures out in the world, and your job would be see to how long you could survive. One prototype allowed the player to attach themselves to a giant monster. Others centered on the atmosphere, the weather, and environmental effects. They didn't have an idea. They didn't. They were riding high on Mass Effect and were screwing around. And so what happened is they farted around and farted around and farted around, and come 2017, they really didn't have a game. And, yes, there have been many games that have very, infamously strayed from their original concept. What BioShock ended up being was not at all what it started off being. And Ken Levine is a bit of a hot mess game developer when it comes to workflow and actually making sure everything isn't on fire. But he has more of an idea of what he wants to accomplish going in than these guys did. And the other thing, apparently, they started doing, they were so arrogant that they didn't listen to their team, never mind their fans, and they burned people out. They actually brought David Gator in from Dragon Age and then insulted him. Don't believe me? This is why David Gator finally left Bioware, apparently. In early 2015, veteran Dragon Age writer David Gator moved over to Anthem, and his version of the story looked a lot different than the ideas with which they'd been experimenting for the past few years. Gator's style was traditional Bioware, big, complicated villains, ancient alien artifacts, and so on, which rankled some of the developers who were hoping for something more subtle. Subtle. Video game. These two things do not compute. There was a lot of resistance from the team who just didn't want to see a sci-fi Dragon Age, I guess, said one developer. A lot of people were like, why are we telling the same story? Let's do something different. When asked for comment on this, Gator said in an email that when he started on the project, Anthem design director Preston Watamaniak had pushed him in a fantasy direction. I was fine with that, as fantasy is more my comfort zone anyhow, but it was clear from the outset that there was a lot of opposition to the change from the rest of the team. Maybe they assumed the idea for it came from me, I'm not sure, but comments like, "It's very Dragon Age" kept coming up regarding any of the work me or my team did, and not in a complimentary manner. There were a lot of people who wanted to say over Anthem's story and kept articulating a desire to do something different without really being clear on what it was outside of it just not being anything BioWare had done before, which was apparently a bad thing. From my perspective, it was rather frustrating. Gator left BioWare in early 2016. As time passed, I didn't feel keen to play the game that I was working on. This, having been in situations where the person who is gatekeeping something, just give us something different. Want it to be different. They have no idea what they want. That is the kiss of death for a project. If the top doesn't know what they want, you shouldn't be moving forward. You don't have a plan. You don't have production. This was just arrogance, plain and simple. Everything of it reeked of arrogance. Everything about it reeked of disorganization, and apparently people didn't want to make a decision, which I'm going to go out and say this is what tends to happen in progressive political circles, as well as like science fiction conventions, that everybody just wants to say friends. So nobody wants to make a decision. There is no chain of command with a person at the top saying, we're doing this, we're not doing this. And apparently Mark Dara, who was the guy on, was it Andromeda? I don't remember. But he came in like the last 6 months and finally started saying, we're doing this, we're not doing this. And stuff finally started to get done. But I'd recommend reading this article. There's a lot of really interesting stuff about the Frostbite engine. TLDR, the Frostbite engine is a pain in the ass to work with, which I'd heard from numerous people who have had to work with it. But it was really interesting. It really showed that, like, there's a really funny moment with an EA executives. I won't spoil it. Go ahead and read it. But this problem originated with BioWare. And it was just the sheer arrogance of, oh, we've always pulled it together before, so we'll always pull it together this time. You can't do that with this much money riding on something. You can't be, oh, we're going to burn out our people, but it'll be fine. That's not fine. If you have people like cracking up from mental health crises, like multiple people, you are not a good place to work. And I think now that it's out, maybe, like I said in the Anthem video, maybe we have a hope in hell that Dragon Age 4 is actually going to be good. Now, I'm a little skeptical of that just because David Gator is not there. And I think that the arrogance of, oh, it's a big villain and, what was it again? Big, complicated villains, ancient alien artifacts. That's what people want in a game. I mean, that's what Destiny is. Like, that's what it is. Big, complicated villains, big, complicated heroes, lots of, like, artifacts everywhere, a really cool world, and those, what do they call those things? The, like kind of zombie type things? I forget. They're, like, they have a massive, Destiny's, that's, you pretty much describe Destiny. People like Destiny. You know, you pretty much describe Mass Effect. People like Mass Effect. People like big, complicated villains and, like, cool worlds. It's a video game. It's not a movie. Why the hell are they trying to invent the wheel? Something I play for explosions should not be using the word subtle in its creative development process. Like, I don't know who this game was for. I don't know who they thought they were appealing to with this game, who they were trying to appeal to, other than frickin' Bob Dylan. This is the issue when people come at things from an arrogant place like that. Star Wars, George Lucas did not set out to make this massive, monumental, world-changing movie. He wanted to make Flash Gordon, I believe, or Buck Rogers or something like that, and couldn't get the copyright, so he made his own thing. You know what BioWare did with Mass Effect and Dragon Age. He didn't set out to make Star Wars. When people set out to make Star Wars, they end up with Starship Troopers. Not a bad movie, but not Star Wars. The thing that was really cool about the original Star Wars, as cheesy as the dialogue was, and the original Dragon Age Origins, as awful as the graphics were comparatively, was that there was a humility and a service to craft in those games. Even the first Mass Effect had a humility to it its own way. But it was a game, Star Wars is a movie that really seemed to want to please the viewer. Dragon Age was a game that really seemed to want to please the player. Same with Mass Effect. It really wanted you to like it. And there was a charm to that I felt was lost even in Inquisition, which got critical acclaim, but I personally thought was the weakest game of the series in a lot of ways. It didn't feel distinct anymore. It was a lot of borrowed ideas from like Skyrim and Witcher. And you felt it. It was already losing its way. And of course, that's the change one thing rule again, right? Change one thing, you're a genius. Change two things, you're a mad genius. Change three things, it's never going to work. I actually got that from, I know he didn't invent it, but Warren Spector said that at a breakfast roundtable once about this is how gaming works. And he's right. You change one thing, genius. Change too much, people can't follow you. And that includes your design team. And I hope BioWare gets it together. But reading this article, and I think the reason people from BioWare started talking to the press on the record, as opposed to off the record the way they were before Anthem came out, is, they actually say in this article, if Dragon Age Inquisition had failed, if it had been a disaster, they think they would have woken up and started doing things differently back then. And that's a very interesting perspective. I would have hoped after Andromeda they woke up, but all they sort of realized we need better graphics, because that was the memes. There was a lot more wrong with Andromeda than just the graphics. If you'd never played a Mass Effect game before and you picked up Andromeda, you'd probably think it was great. It just wasn't so good compared to certainly the first two Mass Effects. 3 wasn't even as good compared to the first two Mass Effects. And that's the thing. BioWare really started to falter with the ending of Mass Effect 3. That was the jumping the shark point. It has been a slide since then. Inquisition, for how pretty it looked and how the combat was less bad than previous Dragon Age games, which does not mean it's good. It just means it's less bad. The story choices did not feel as fulfilling. Certainly not as Origin. Maybe it felt bigger than Dragon Age 2, but I don't know that it felt better. It was all over the place because they still had the domino effect of Dragon Age 2 was rushed. It messed up their story. I really felt like the story they really wanted to tell came into Dragon Age Inquisition very, very late, with the elves and, the ancient elves and the elf gods and all that stuff. But there was a lot of stuff in Dragon Age Inquisition I felt shallow and profoundly unsatisfying. It just did not click. It didn't have the magic for me that even Dragon Age 2 did. Certainly Origins did. Certainly the first Mass Effect did. Mass Effect 2, yeah, still. I clicked with Mass Effect 2, even though it felt smaller. But Mass Effect 3, that's where the arrogance started. And that's when they started fighting with their fan base, and that's when they stopped listening. And maybe they were burned out, fine, but it sounds like they're continuing to burn. You guys got to get on the horse, BioWare. You can't, you can't leak to the press, not put your name on the article because you want to keep your jobs, and really expect things to change. Someone in that company is going to have to start listening to people. And it sounds like that's the biggest problem. They just didn't listen. And when you're making interactive entertainment, you need to listen. Make sense? Makes sense. I think I forgot to do this this time, so I'll end here. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.